What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Chris Raybon of the Action Network. And on this show, we're going to discuss the NFL preseason. Here to break it down with me, one of the top rankers in the game, the most accurate fantasy projector for the last, I don't know how many years, the odds maker, Sean Koerner. Sean, what's going on?
What's up? I am very excited for today's pod. The preseason always has a special place in my heart, and it's usually a profitable time for me as well. So I think more people should bet it. So I'm hoping we can convince, at least a few people to join in on the fun with us this year.
Yeah, and of course, the NFL preseason gets underway with the Hall of Fame game Thursday, August 1st. So that kicks off real live football for us to finally bet on. And, we'll talk about that game at the end of the pod. That's the Houston Texans against the Chicago Bears. But I want to start out by kind of just talking about more generally, the preseason has a reputation for being something that only degenerates enjoy. Do you think that's still the case, or do you think there are indeed significant edges to betting on the NFL preseason?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what your definition of a degenerate is. I definitely think there's an edge. And, it's been months since we've been able to bet on NFL games, and that changes next week. So you're telling me people don't want to indulge in some preseason betting? That's their bad. I think they're the ones missing out. So, while they sit around waiting for week one to happen, we're going to be betting on preseason, watching these games. I think it's also important to just point out that we're going to be seeing players that might have to make starts this year. Tyson Bagent, Tommy DeVito, and others, were all players I was very familiar with once the preseason wrapped up. So when they had to make their spot starts, I kind of already had an idea of, how good or bad they were and just what, general feel they had on the field. So I think that it's also good, capping for the regular season as well. And I think there's a pretty big edge if you have the right approach. I've gone, I think it's 41-22, so 65% on track bets. And our app, the last three preseasons combined, we didn't have preseason in 2020. So that's right around when I started taking it a little bit more seriously the past few seasons. So probably an even higher rate on props. There are some player props for preseason as well. So I'm not saying just blindly betting on preseason is, you're going to be successful. You have to know what you're doing. You have to do your homework. But I think there's a huge edge there because at the end of the day, it's kind of chaotic. So if you find an edge and you have a reason for it, it's been very profitable.
Yeah, I think if you're knowledgeable on things like the backup quarterbacks and who those guys are and, how good they are, that can be a major edge, especially if you kind of have a sense of which quarterbacks will play and how long they'll play. Being knowledgeable and, watching a lot of college football, I think helps because most of the guys that are going to play the most are going to be rookies, undrafted free agents, younger guys who really haven't been on display much. Trends, I think, are interesting this time of year because, the books are kind of creating more naive, so to speak, models. So if you kind of have some information that you can kind of differentiate yourself with, I think it's interesting. Like about a quarter of all preseason spreads open and close right around 3. So, for example, if you see a number that it never reaches 3, it can usually be a tell. Over the past decade plus, preseason dogs +2 or less that it opened inside of 3 are 71 and 41 against the spread, 63%. It's been profitable in 9 in each of the last 9 preseasons, 9 of the last 10. When it comes to your overall process, Sean, you mentioned how successful you've been. What is kind of your process for kind of handicapping a preseason game or preseason slate?
Yeah, so I really have a bottom up approach because I'm creating the player projections that you can find at fantasylabs.com and use those with our models and tools to help you build DFS lineups. So I'm also using those to attack player props. But in order to make these, I'm trying to get a sense as to which players are going to play when. Just understanding the hypothetical team power rating during that time. So you already hit the nail on the head. It really comes down to quarterback play when it comes to preseason. I mean, that's the most important position in football. But every team's going to have potentially 3 to 4 quarterbacks playing. Sometimes, one per quarter. So I create QB charts for each game, for each matchup, where I'm kind of projecting where they're going to play when, and their power rating, how good they are. And then it also, you want to know if the players playing with the first team offense or the second team offense, things like that, what players are attached to. But at the end of the day, I'm, identifying certain parts of the game where one team might have an edge over the other, or, both offenses might be humming. I might look at the over, or, both quarterbacks are shitty. I'm looking at the under. So I'm kind of using that approach. That's why I tend to bet. I don't really bet on the full game line or spread necessarily. Sometimes I think there's a huge edge in the first quarter or the first half. So I'll bet those before the game. And then in game, I make a ton of in-game bets. Sometimes I think, this team's going to have an edge coming out of halftime. So I'll bet the second half line, or just try to bet once they get to the fourth quarter. So I'm really viewing the game as 4 separate quarters, because that's how teams kind of handle it. So, so that's kind of my approach. Is I'm just really just trying to handicap who's going to be in the game and how, well they're going to play while they're on the field.
Yeah, I'm beginning to see why people like you and I are considered degenerates. Just making like third quarter preseason bets. It's like, there's 4 different quarters. Like it's a lot. And for people that may be listening that maybe aren't just going to be sitting there hanging on every quarter of every preseason game, and has to kind of streamline the process a little bit. Let me just ask to start. I think something as simple as a depth chart might be a starting point for someone if they're looking to bet a preseason game. How do you kind of incorporate depth charts? Do they even matter at all? Is it something that's valuable for the average NFL preseason bettor?
Yeah, no, of course they matter. That's really, I'd say, the most important thing really when it comes to preseason betting, because everyone that's suiting up for that game will probably play. So I think knowing, how much a guy like Patrick Mahomes is going to play, or who's coming in when, I think that definitely matters. And like I mentioned, obviously the quarterback matters. An example would be if the Bengals opt to hold out Joe Burrow for a preseason game, but they want to start, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and have them play a quarter. Jake Browning would benefit from that. Whereas if they're just saying we're going to rest all the starters and Jake Browning's out there with the second, third string offense, you're going to have to factor that in as well. And especially when it comes to props, I think it definitely matters, the depth chart, more so when it comes to that, because there's some games where you're going to have 6, 7 active running backs. So it's really hard to pinpoint, one back's going to, see a bunch of touches. Whereas sometimes you'll only have 2 to 3 even healthy running backs active. So that one or all 3 of them are going to see more touches than you typically see in a preseason game. So all that definitely matters. But again, I'm not saying that somebody should sit there and, be, like you said, a degenerate like us. We're doing all the work. You can piggyback us and kind of trust our process. But it's a lot of work sitting there trying to figure out, who's going to be playing, and, the evaluate all the players that are going to be in the game. It's a lot of work. I'm not denying that, but that's something that I'm already doing.
Yeah, and maybe it may or may not be because we probably have, half of these, third string depth charts memorized in our heads anyway. But,
right.
For me, I think it's more than just looking at the depth chart. It's kind of, and you kind of alluded to it, the nuances of the roster battles, which players a team and its coaching staff wants to get a look at, which are usually going to be, rookies, guys that really haven't played much, undrafted free agents, guys who are, on the bubble for a potential special team spot, apparently, and kind of knowing too who they prefer to bubble wrap, and, guys that, typically if you're drafted on day 2, even, you're probably guaranteed a roster spot, and it's not until you start going into those day 3 picks that you start seeing, rookies cut before year 1. So it's kind of knowing those things, but I think, with the move from, it was for a while 4 preseason games. I think back in the day it was what, there was 6 preseason games at one point.
Oh wow!
In the 70s, I think there was at its worst it was like 6 preseason games and 14 regular season games or something. Now we're down to 3, and we're trying to go toward an 18th regular season game at some point. But I do think there's kind of less uniformity, and it's more used as just an extension of camp. And a lot of teams are also using the joint practices nowadays. So kind of using those depth charts and being able to kind of determine, okay, who's going to finish the game. A lot of times those guys will play longer than the rest of the depth chart, who only might get, a quarter, a half a quarter. So there's a lot more nuance than just simply looking at the depth chart and saying, okay, this particular string of players will play this long. It's kind of a mix and match. And of course, quarterback information is always going to be the most important, because a lot of times what will happen is that, like, the coaching staff will, detail their quarterback plan, for a particular game. A lot of times teams carry an extra quarterback or 2 in camp, just to help with practice. So sometimes those camp bodies finish out, especially early on. But for you, you mentioned it is a lot of information, but you've obviously had a lot of success betting the preseason. So all this information is out there. Now you can add artificially generated information to that. People got to be careful of. So I guess the way I'll put it to you is, when you're looking to gain an edge betting the NFL preseason, besides following a Sean Koerner and besides following a Chris Raybon, just in terms of NFL team news, etc., beats, whatever, depth charts, all that, what is relevant, what is not relevant, what is noise, what is maybe relevant but doesn't really give you an edge, and ultimately when you're talking about news, like what information particularly is the most valuable to you, and that you're really looking to kind of filter out from all the puff pieces and noise and just useless information?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and I think it's just years of experience of knowing coach speak. Every coach is different when it comes to the preseason, how they approach it. Like, Sean McVay hates the preseason, absolutely hates it. He never plays his starters. Even guys that he might consider like on the bubble to start, doesn't play them. So just knowing that going into the preseason, you're not going to see Matthew Stafford, probably not going to see Kyren Williams, especially since he was kind of banged up. It seems like every week, like week 1 or 2 of the preseason, usually week 2, Andy Reid says he wants Patrick Mahomes and the first team offense to play the entire first half. That never happens. So he's going to say it again this year. Don't believe it. And he said that last year. And I think sometimes when coaches say they want their offense to play like the first half, they really just want like a successful touchdown drive, and then they pull them. So some of the play calling can be pretty aggressive early in the game when the starters are out there. They just want like a really good drive and get them out of the game. So that's why I like betting those teams early on. So last year, his infamous, Mahomes is going to play the entire first half. I just took the Chiefs -1.5 for the first quarter. And they had 2 really rough drives to start. They went 3 and out and punted. So I figured, he's just going to stay in the game for maybe one more drive. And sure enough, with like 7 seconds left in the first quarter, Mahomes threw an 18-yard touchdown pass to Justin Watson. And then sure enough, they pulled him. So if you bet on the first half, you were kind of pissed. But that's why I bet specifically on the first quarter, just because I've known that Andy Reid always says this. And then Mahomes typically only plays a couple of drives. So that's just a very nuanced example, but that's kind of my point, is everything's, a little bit different. You're going to see guys have a great camp, and you're going to see highlights on Twitter and things like that. Their player props might get juiced up. It doesn't mean that I'm betting, taking the over or under either way. But a lot of players might get some necessary or unnecessary hype, and you kind of have to decipher what's real and what isn't. So that's kind of the fun part about preseason, really, is kind of handicapping, what's smoke, what's real and what's not. But at the end of the day, I think coach speak, specifically for every coach, is a little bit different, and just from years of experience, you kind of learn how to like translate it.
Yeah, and coach speak, I think, goes right along with media speak. I guess in a general sense, we're part of the media in a more general sense, but I mean specifically when it comes to team beat writers and people who are really kind of writing in the weeds about each particular team and its preseason plans, hopes, aspirations, and whatnot. A lot of times, I think you're going to see an overly positive slant because these writers, for better or worse, their audience is the team's fans, and so everyone's 0-0 right now, so you don't want to be too doom and gloom. So you got to remember that a lot of the beat stuff you read and the puff pieces and camp buzz are going to be a little bit biased, kind of a little bit fluffy and whatnot. And I think also, a lot of that news, like if it really stands out, it's not ultimately going to be too actionable just because everyone who does take the time to kind of do a little extra legwork is going to come upon like similar information. So a lot of times like the market has already factored it in. But I think for me, the most actionable stuff is just going back to that quarterback plan. There's certain coaches that will, kind of lay out their quarterback plans, and you can't always take it, 100%, but at least you have kind of an idea of, okay, like, are they looking to get, 3 quarterbacks in the game? Is it more 2? Is it 4? Is there any quarterback designated to play like an entire half? Especially if they're talking the second half, who's not going to play, whether it's a quarterback or even someone, another position. You can kind of get a sense that way. But I think those, specific plans, you still can't take at full face value, but especially when they pertain to quarterback, I think that tends to be the stuff I'm looking for. And a lot of the other stuff, you kind of have to filter out because, you just got so many players that are never going to play like a real NFL game. Like you got 3rd string, 4th string offensive lines playing, just a lot of volatility in that sense. But in kind of staying with, this question of just information and its value for you as you're kind of going through your process, handicapping a game, handicapping a slate, what are your favorite specific or general sources of preseason intel?
Yeah, so I mean, the Athletic is great at laying out, what the coaches are saying, some beat writers are saying, and a lot of times, they kind of map out what the plan is for that team going into the game. I also just search Google, like I'm just looking up specifically like what the plan is for that game, so it can come from any different sources. Twitter is great when it comes to that. I'll get to that in a bit, but Twitter is great for like breaking news right before the game starts. There's been some situations in preseason that has been key. PFF has a lot of good preseason data. I create some sheets for myself to kind of reference when I'm setting up projections and just kind of evaluating how these quarterbacks do specifically in preseason. And it's a lot of work. And again, I don't recommend emulating my approach to a T or anything, but everyone should feel free to leverage that. But it's a lot of just scouting out, searching out information. And some teams, their beat writers are better than others. You kind of mentioned that is like some are very specific, getting down to what the game plan is. Some aren't. So there's a little bit more uncertainty there. And I kind of put that in my QB charts when I know for a fact a guy's going to be coming in the game and I have more like gray, like uncertainty moments. And that's kind of when I'm watching the game, I'm looking for that. But when I'm like before the game, I think Twitter is the best place to get like breaking news. And the preseason, there are some spots where you get things that happen that won't happen in the regular season. There was an example, the Rams, Matt Gay like tweaked his hamstring or something. So McVay said, we're just not going to have a kicker today. So we're going to go for it on 4th down. We are going to go for 2 every time. That's it. That's our game plan. And it'd be one thing, like if it was Matthew Stafford in the first team offense, that could actually help them out. Who knows? But when it's, Brett Rippon and the 3rd stringers, that is not good for the offense. So I forget if I faded the Rams or took the under or something, but that game was a disaster. And I found out that news like on Twitter. So you kind of have to react quickly to those things. There was another game, I believe it was in Canada. There was like a pothole in the end zone, and they were contemplating they weren't going to cancel the game, but they were contemplating making the field like 80 yards.
Yeah.
And as this was happening, I was thinking they're either going to postpone it or this game's going to be played on an 80-yard field. So I just hammered the over, and I was tracking what was going on there, and that was all on Twitter. And sure enough, they played the game on an 80-yard field, and the game went over. But I think it ended up going under the closing line. So it was key to get on this early. And I think Twitter was the best for, breaking news like that. Whereas, you're not going to find an updated article on The Athletic for something like that. So usually like an hour before the game, I have my Twitter list and I'm looking for any like quirky, weird news that you can get in the preseason, especially with like players getting ruled out. But I think Twitter's the best the day of when you're trying to make bets.
Yeah, Twitter is obviously, a valuable tool. The one thing is, you can kind of fall into the trap, I think, of you're kind of waiting for something to react to, which, you might be too reactive. But yeah, for somebody like us who's already, probably going to bet it regardless and just want to be able to maybe get more bets in, to react, I think Twitter is very valuable. I would also say, just for somebody listening to this podcast, just the Action Network app, a lot of times, you can get alerts when any action expert bets a game. And usually, I mean, the people here, whether it's us or somebody else, because we just do this for a living, if there's an edge to be had on a particular game, and you'll probably figure it out through the game page on the app, because you'll probably, get an alert that your favorite expert is betting it, or multiple experts are betting it, a particular side, or attacking an angle in a certain type of way. So that's very valuable. But yeah, I totally agree with, if you are going to kind of pour over more, minutiae and kind of team specific information, a subscription based site, like if you can, whether it's, something like The Athletic or even a specific paper, a newspaper or whatever publication particular to that city, just the more exclusive, I think, the information that you have, the better, than just like, like what the first thing that pops up on Google. I think it's just more likely that more people know it, and the market might already be factoring it in. But one other thing I would have to say for me is just Action Labs, which is, our tool that, you can filter all past betting information and highlight trends and whatnot, because I think I mentioned earlier, but the books also aren't spending as much time setting these lines. The market doesn't know as much. So being able to kind of go back and look over a lot of preseason betting data quickly and identify trends, I think a lot of times you're never going to blindly bet a trend, but I think preseason kind of lends itself to trends because the market can be more of a tell in particular situations. So I'll talk about some particular trends that have been profitable for like a decade plus in the preseason, because you only have 3-4 games. So I'll talk about those in a bit, but Bet Labs is the way and Action Labs is the way I kind of, identify that information quickly. So that's another thing that, if you're kind of interested in, be sure to check that out. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about Action Pro. And if you're listening to this podcast, you likely already have the Action Network app. If you don't, go download it. It's free to download, award-winning app. Really excellent. But if you want to take things to that next level, and if you're listening to a preseason betting pod in late July, early August, you might just want to take things to the next level. Action Pro is the answer. It gives you access to premium articles from all of the action experts, player prop picks, projection edges from Sean Koerner and the rest of the Action Network analytics team, tools, models, and more. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pricing to sign up. And right now you can get a 1-year sub to Action Pro for $119. That's less than $10 a month. Includes access to all of our Action Pro content for all sports, not just the NFL. So be sure to visit actionnetwork.com/pricing to take advantage today. And as we kind of continue our discussion of how to get an edge in terms of preseason betting and looking ahead to this preseason in particular, I think my big picture question more generally is, what are you looking for in this preseason? Is it teams? Is it players? Is it what are you kind of anything we should be eyeing, or just things that stand out to you as you look ahead to 2024?
I mean, everything really, and I consider each game its own unique event. So I'm just looking forward to dive into the game's matchups. And then spot players when the game's happening. Spot players, I'm starting to think are better or worse than I expected. And I remember last year just being really impressed how much Jordan Love had grown, and he looked much more comfortable than years past. So that's when I started pegging him as a breakout player. And this year's Geno Smith, I started saying that. Like, that was preseason. That was just watching him in preseason. So I think I'm just kind of like an open book right now and just going to let it come to me. And I have all my opinions going into it. But we'll get to some players I'm interested in watching. But just overall, just every team, every player, I'm going to be, watching and see if anything stands out.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. There's you mentioned it. You have to be an open book. I don't think you want to be kind of looking for specifics in terms of what could happen in the preseason and how it might factor into the larger betting trends or to the regular season or something. But because there's the things that I think end up being the most valuable, whether it's directly tied to betting in a particular preseason angle, or something investing in maybe a player in fantasy or DFS for the regular season or whatever. It's you just got to kind of notice things as they come up. And an example for me, and then we'll kind of talk about some players we're interested in seeing, and then we'll get to some trends, some preseason specific trends that I talked about earlier. But I remember last year when I believe it was the first preseason game for the Texans and the Patriots, and at that point, CJ Stroud didn't really look like much of anything. I mean, he was just getting his feet wet. But I remember within maybe 4 or 5 snaps of watching Tank Dell, I was like, all right, this guy's, he's already the best receiver on Houston. Like, I don't need to see much more of that. And, obviously Nico also ended up having a great year. But, if I was able to kind of, when I'm doing my weekly fantasy ranks in season, be more bullish on a guy like Dell, because I had remembered how good he looked in that preseason in that preseason game that I watched that, was otherwise a very nondescript Patriot Texan, snooze fest, I believe it was for the most part. And I could be wrong, but I just remember Tank Dell making a couple of really good plays, running a couple of really good routes. And that kind of set in motion, things, during the regular season where, okay, I'm more willing to invest in a Tank Dell over on a prop, or, rank him highly in weekly rankings and whatnot. So yeah, that's just an example. And you're not going to catch everything, and certain things just aren't going to be there. Like, I wish I could sit here and say, yeah, I saw it with CJ Stroud from the jump, but I think I saw CJ Stroud actively improve after the first 2 games of the regular season, and I was able to kind of put that in perspective because I had seen him take some snaps in the preseason. But the more you can kind of watch the games, and the less you have to just rely on hearsay and pour through all these beats and see what's real and what's not, the better. So just being able to watch these games, if you're really interested, I do think helps, because most people aren't, especially when it comes to preseason. And that's kind of a segue to before we get to trends. My question is, are there any players just you're interested in seeing, or teams or situations? Maybe it's because it's going to provide you an edge in betting or fantasy, or maybe you're just interested in seeing some players hit the field. Who are you kind of looking for player wise in 2024?
Yeah, I have a couple players. The first is Jalen Wright of the Dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
He's their 4th round pick out of Tennessee. He's fast, 4.32 40 time. Just seems like a perfect fit for the Dolphins offense. Granted, he's going to be behind Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane this year. So, just one of them missing time might make him relevant in fantasy. He's also a bigger back, 5'11", 210 pounds. So he might be more durable than those 2 backs. Maybe that's what they're looking for. So I think he could see quite a bit of work in preseason, and, he could blow by these 2nd, 3rd string defenders. So I'm excited to see him And maybe he might help me win some bets too. But the other guy I'm really excited to see, and that's Hendon Hooker, the quarterback for the Lions. He might have been forgotten about because he didn't play at all last season in the preseason or regular season. He was coming back from the ACL injury, but he was considered a first-round talent. He fell to the Lions in the third round, maybe because teams thought the Tennessee offense was too gimmicky, but mainly because, he was coming back from the ACL injury, so they didn't want to waste, the rookie season on a guy that probably wasn't going to play at all. But I'm interested to see how he looks. I'm guessing he'll be Jared Goff's backup, so if he were to miss time, he might make some starts this year, but he could end up being, a solid NFL quarterback. So I think when he's in the game, I'll be looking to see how the market reacts, but I think he's going to look very good for, second-year player. But these will be the first reps we're seeing with him in a Lions uniform. So he's one player specifically I'm excited to see.
Yeah, we just really don't know how he looks in the NFL. So I'm with you on that. And a couple guys for me are Xavier Worthy, if he actually gets on the field. I know he's been missing some practice time, but he, just because of the speed, always kind of interested to see how that speed is going to look, first time NFL uniform. Is he really just going to look like a blur, like a Madden creative player compared to the other guys out there? And it's going to be kind of, exacerbated by the fact that a lot of the guys playing on defense are going to be slower than, what you'd see in a normal NFL game. But that's just because of that record breaking speed. I think he's really interesting and kind of gives you a sense of, just how bullish to be on, a turnaround for that Chiefs pass offense. Because I think if they can unlock him in addition to having Marquise Brown, you're really going to add like a new dimension in terms of field stretching that's been lacking, especially last year. But another one is the guy I'm really interested to see, and this is not a household name at all. I don't know if it might be a little bit relevant if you're a fantasy player and let's say Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, but Lions running back / defensive back / special team return man, Sione Vaki, the rookie out of Utah, kind of started playing some running back. You always take note of guys like that can make a position switch and are athletic enough to do it. And because a lot of times those guys do end up popping at the NFL level I remember when, Terrell Pryor was going from like a quarterback to a receiver, and then, he had a couple, big games in DFS at receiver. And it's so, Darren Waller's a guy who's a wide receiver, switched to a tight end. So this guy, Vaki, he just kind of pops when you look at him as a running back. And we talk about for something like fantasy or season long props, how with your running back upside. Well, if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, you probably see David Montgomery coming into even more value. But if you kind of squint, you could see if Gibbs goes down and this guy Vaki hits, he could kind of be play some of that role and give the Lions another explosive element to that offense as if they need more of that. So, he's a guy that I'm really kind of looking at and interested to see how he looks at, especially at running back this preseason. Okay. And, we're going to kind of look ahead to the Hall of Fame game, which is, the first game up, but I do want to just touch on some trends, that have kind of remain profitable for a large sample size of preseason. And remember, this is not like the NFL regular season market, which is a lot, I think, sharper. A lot more bets are coming in. Here you could find a lot more edges. Not as many people betting these games, but number one is just road teams in general. When you're looking at the preseason, a lot of times there's less information to go off of. So like something as simple as a home field advantage, essentially decides the spread in a lot of these situations. And you rarely see road teams favored. And you also rarely see, the public, betting heavily on road teams. If the market goes one direction or the other, more likely than not, they're just going with the home team and the favorite. And so when you have like a contrarian road team, which is a team getting fewer than 35% of the bets, especially in most preseason matchups are going to be these matchups that don't happen often in the regular season, these interconference matchups. Those are 73% against the spread since 2010, 52, 19, and 3. And they're winning by 5.3 points per game on average. Over 90% of those road teams are underdogs, but it's just one of those spots that it's only going to happen. What's that about? Maybe 5 to 6 times, 4 to 7 times per preseason. You find a spot like that, but you can find the public betting information in the Action app. It is built into Action Labs as well, and sometimes just something as simple as like looking at the market and looking for those kind of spots can give you an edge. And the same thing is true of road teams that are underdogs that are coming off a postseason berth versus a home team that isn't. A lot of times, that team, just because they're at home and people assume that maybe a good team is not going to play its starters, and the worst team is going, has more younger guys and had a better draft pick, and they're at home. So this is the time when that kind of team, even though they'd be inferior in the regular season, a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, it's preseason, so the good teams are going to just take it easy. But a lot of times, underdogs in those spots, when they're coming off a playoff berth and you wouldn't expect it, those teams against non-playoff home favorites, 58%, 119, 86, and 9 against the spread since 2005, covering by nearly 2 points per game. So those are just a couple examples, spread-wise. And then from a total perspective, I think the median score for preseason and the average around 37 to 38 points, and 37 has been a key number in terms of totals betting for the preseason over the last decade. When the total is higher than 37, the under is 59%, 217, 150, and 9. But then when the total is under 37, so when the total of 36.5 or below, that's when you want to look more at the overs. Overs of 36.5 or below are at 57% since 2006. So over the last 2 decades, they've been really profitable. So that's kind of how you look at the totals. And then, another thing we have to talk about before we look ahead to this Bears-Texan Hall of Fame game is the Baltimore Ravens. They finally did lose another preseason game, but overall, their record is just, it's one of the craziest things I think I've seen in sports. Since 2016, Baltimore is 24-2 straight up in the preseason, 92%. And then against the spread, 19-6-1, 76%, covering by 8.8 points per game on average. Any thoughts just on the Ravens? And, I know you kind of are very good at kind of modeling and factoring in, and calculating odds and factoring in regression to the mean and what's kind of randomness and what's not. Mm-hmm. Just how do you kind of handicap the Ravens, given such a streak like that? Is that something you're kind of fading, or are you just kind of riding it as long as it continues to play out like that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't blindly fade it or tail it just because I think now the public is certainly aware of it, so that their numbers might be inflated. I think it could just be Harbaugh's a good coach and he keeps that going in preseason. Maybe he's doing things to even win these games. But I think there could be something that I meant to bring up earlier, but these second, third string quarterbacks that have rushing upside, I think are more valuable in preseason because, a lot of these guys, they don't have chemistry with really subpar pass catchers. And they're not great quarterbacks, throwing it. But if they can pull it down and run, that does give you an advantage in the preseason, especially with defenses, just playing soft zone, not really good defenders on the field. I found that scrambling quarterbacks can have a pretty big edge. And that's kind of what the Ravens do. They usually have their backups are rushing quarterbacks because they're backing up Lamar Jackson. So you'll see Emory Jones is a rookie. He's from Cincinnati, very good rushing quarterback. So when he's in the game, he might not be a great passer as a raw rookie, but he can run the ball. So I think that might be one of the reasons why the Ravens have an edge in preseason. It's something that I handicap for other teams as well. Just if your backups are good running the ball, it helps in the preseason. So that might be one of many reasons as to why this is. Could be just random luck, but I think a lot of it's due to just the coaching decisions in game, and maybe they just have really good depth. A lot of reasons, but either way, like it's a big enough sample size. There's something there for sure.
Yeah, Harbaugh has been the coach for the Ravens almost 2 decades now, and overall, 44-14 straight up in the preseason, 76%, 38-19-1 against the spread, 67% covering by an average of 5.9 points per game. Those numbers courtesy of Bet Labs, and I do think it is something we should have talked about earlier too. Is a lot of coaches are going into these games. They are looking to see certain packages, certain plays, how they work, and not necessarily trying to win the game. And you kind of alluded to, kicking battles. If a team, is going to, if a team might, has an active kicking battle going on, I think that team is more likely to settle for a field goal on 4th down instead of going for it, just to get it, another opportunity to kick, or they might go for more extra points instead of 2-point conversions, things like that. So, but the Ravens, for better or worse, they seem to play each preseason game under Harbaugh to win, and that's just something that not a lot of coaches are really doing, especially as we get as the regular season grows in terms of games, and these coaches are trying to keep their guys healthy. It's just not really the norm. It sounds crazy, but it's not really the norm, I think, for a lot of these coaches to enter these games trying to win the games. And I think the Ravens generally do. And then another thing with the Ravens is they've been a highly successful regular season organization as well. And just the roster building and the fact that I think the second and third teams for the Baltimore Ravens, the second and third string, are generally just better than much of the other NFL rosters out there. So those are things you kind of pick up in terms of just kind of following along. And but yeah, there's definitely something to it. And I don't think it's just there might be a little bit of luck, to go 24-2, but there's definitely something behind that, so definitely something to continue to watch for. And that's always kind of the first thing I do, for when we get beyond the Hall of Fame game, is just, all right, who are the Ravens playing this week? And is there anything stopping me from betting on the Ravens? And then I'll kind of go from there, in terms of breaking down the rest of the preseason slate.
Yeah. And then just real quick, going back to your over under, the key number being 37. I thought that was a good point. I'm usually dealing in quarters and halves. And when I'm talking about like a first half or second half line, I'm usually talking about 17 and 20 being the key number. So yeah, 37 would make sense. But I'm usually talking about wanting access to either of those numbers with the over or under. But one thing that I wanted to bring up and curious your thoughts is we're going to be seeing this new kickoff rule introduced in the preseason, right? Now, I guess the first time we see it is the Hall of Fame game. Do you think that is going to boost the scoring environment enough to matter, especially in the preseason, because that would be a special teams play where you're not banking on, Brett Rippon moving the team down the field. It could be just a talented returner giving them good field position or even scoring a touchdown. Is this something that you think is going to change scoring much at all to matter?
I think it could. I think, it depends what you think of as mattering. Like if you're trying to, model these games down to or project these games down to the nearest half point and 1/10 of a point. So if you're a sports book, I think it does. Overall, I think it's only going to probably be, a couple 1/10 of a point either way, but it definitely will factor in. And I think it's also important for, when it comes to now the regular season, and a lot of what we do when we model these games, and as the sports books are doing the same thing, is you're projecting scores and spreads and totals. Well, you need some baselines, you need some league averages, and so if the league average points increases because of this new kickoff rule, that's something we have to keep take into account. Whether okay, well now. It does the average total maybe tick up a half point or something like that due to this. That's just something that, it's still going to be a small sample size in the preseason, but it will be kind of our first look at, more generally how it impacts the game, how teams are approaching it. Is it going to lead to an uptick of kicker injuries, for example? That's something I think, teams are thinking about because, you're going to have to tackle more on these plays now. So that is something specific to 2024. And I do think it'll have an impact. I think it'll also be talked about a lot. So I think it's something where, maybe the market factors it in too much. If, like, let's say in week 1 of the preseason, there's 2 or 3 big plays or touchdowns, even, it might be overinflated, and there might just be an edge on betting unders, in teams that have good returns or that had a kickoff return for a touchdown in the prior week. So there's a lot of different ways I think we might potentially get insight that can help us bet in the preseason and the regular season from kind of just looking and observing how the new kickoff rule plays out. All right, so I want to close it out here. Mention the Hall of Fame game, Texans at the Bears. You could see why they schedule that. They're 2 of the most exciting teams in terms of their wide receiving core, and 2 talented young quarterbacks. Any thoughts as we look ahead? Anything you're kind of looking out for? Any handicaps? I'll have a write up on actionnetwork.com next week ahead of that game, but just anything that kind of catches your eye, anything you're going to be looking for that Hall of Fame game.
Yeah. I'll probably have something. I'm already kind of making my QB charts for that game, but it's definitely too early to be locking anything in. On the Texans side, I'm almost certain we won't see CJ Stroud or most of the Texans, like key starters playing that game. The Hall of Fame game is an extra game, so we just rarely see players with nothing to prove playing that game. It's really a game to evaluate, the bottom of the depth chart. I'm interested to see if we see Caleb Williams. I'm assuming we won't, but a series or 2 from a rookie like him wouldn't be too surprising. That would be fun to see. I think early in the game, the Texans might have the edge with Davis Mills and Case Keenum. Say what you will about those guys, but they're like, league average backups. They tend to play pretty well in preseason, but I think the Texans wide receiver depth chart is solid. So they're going to be throwing to guys like John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, who could start, for other teams. It wouldn't shock me if a guy like Hutchinson leads this game in receiving yards. Whereas the Bears, they're going to be using Tyson Bagent, Brett Rippon under center. I think Brett Rippon is just awful. He's one of the worst quarterbacks year in, year out in the preseason. So I think the Texans might have an edge in the first half when those quarterbacks are battling it out, where, the fourth quarter might be Austin Reed for the Bears and Tim Boyle for the Texans. So I might be locking in the Bears there if they're getting any points. I've been talking about the Gen deep dives. I've been watching some Austin Reed film already. Kind of reminds me of like a dollar store Tom Brady. He has great poise, handles pressure really well. He had the 3rd lowest pressure rate to sack rate in all of college football last year. So I think that could bode well in preseason. He doesn't have a great arm, doesn't have good touch on his pass, but I think he is potentially better than Tim Boyle, who's one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about the game will play out, and kind of how I'm going to attack it is possibly Texans first half, possibly taking the Bears in the fourth quarter, but still plenty of time to kind of hear, the coach speak and get a better sense on, how this quarterback rotation and who's actually going to be playing in this game come next week.
Yeah. And, I haven't seen a total yet, and you kind of hit on some of the quarterbacks, but I think just because, the general public, you think of these 2 teams, you think, oh, okay, great young quarterbacks, talented receiving corps. I wonder if the total will open a tick too high.
I think it's 32.5. I think it's around 32, 33. Right around there.
So because the Hall of Fame games usually are because it's the first preseason game, you usually see, even lower totals, but that sounds about right. Yeah. Assuming none of those guys play. And then the line I've seen, and again, this will be updated and could change, but I've seen it like Houston 1.5 or so. Is that what you've seen? Plus 1.5 for. So that would, that you do expect a close, low-scoring game in these kind of games. There's not much separation, but that trend that I spoke about earlier, when you have a spread that opens inside of 3, you have an underdog that's a very short underdog. A lot of times that can be a tell. So, that's a 63% trend. One of the things too is just the thing about the preseason is even, as we sit here and record an hour-long preseason pod, I should say that I think one of the things we know is that we don't know anything, in the sense of, we can pour over film of, fifth string quarterbacks and whatnot, but there's going to be so much more randomness and variance than even the regular season, because you're talking about, a lot of guys that will never see an NFL field at the O-line positions, in the secondaries and whatnot. That's why you said you like to look for quarterbacks who can run. Something as simple as that could be a big edge when nobody's open, or when they're just confused and they don't know the play maybe all that well, or the scheme all that well. So there's a lot kind of understanding that there's a lot of uncertainty and randomness. Just getting points, is valuable in the preseason. So it's kind of like the regular season in the sense that you're going to be more profitable over the long term, I think, betting underdogs in the preseason, betting unders in the preseason. So a lot of times if once you start really digging into things, and there's maybe, players you're more familiar with, and you really like certain guys, it kind of might lead you to, bet more overs or more favorites, because you're like, oh, well, I like this guy, I think he's a good quarterback or whatnot. But it's still the normal betting kind of rules of market supply, which is, the books are usually taking more money on the overs, on the favorites. They're usually shading the lines or moving the lines in that direction because of that. So you are, more often than not, this is just generally speaking, going to see more value, in being contrarian, looking at underdogs, looking at unders, which is the same way I think you end up maintaining long-term profitability in the regular season betting on the NFL. All right. Mentioned, for the Hall of Fame game, we'll both probably have something written up, actionnetwork.com for that. And also you can just find it in the Action app as well. So be on the lookout for that. And that's going to wrap it up here. So hopefully if you're listening and it kind of excited to get into some NFL action after the layoff, this kind of scratched that itch and maybe gave you some ideas or some starting points for becoming a more frequent, more profitable preseason bettor. So this was a good one, Sean. I always enjoy it, and we'll be back next time. But you can follow Sean on X at @_oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon, and of course we're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. Until next time. Let's get this shmoney. This has been the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.